You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss American author and speaker Byron Katie and her method of self-inquiry known as the work.
She helps uncover that through, and this is, we haven't even said anything, so this episode is about Byron Katie.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Donnie.
Well, actually, you had told me about the work. It's been a while now, so I finally looked it up and some of her videos and read some things about her. And it's really interesting. She's now in her 80s, so she was born in 1942 from a blue-collar family. Dad worked on the railroad, mom was a housewife. She ended up getting into a career in real estate, and by the mid-'80s, she was on her second marriage. She was depressed. She was basically an alcoholic and took codeine, and she found herself basically suicidal. She contacted an employer-provided health insurance line, and this is 86, so this is before EAPs were really common in big workplaces. But anyway, so she contacts them. They refer her to a facility in Los Angeles. She was there about 2 weeks, and she had this epiphany where she was like, it's my own thoughts that are hurting me the most and keeping me in this state. Once she had that, it was almost like she was instantly cured of her depression. And then so she goes on to help people out kind of informally. And then in the 90s, she developed it into a therapy model and then started working with the actual clientele and helping them, and then went on to write books, etc. Little side tangent. Her son is Ross Robinson, and Ross Robinson is considered the grandfather of nu metal. And he's one of the people responsible for the world knowing who Korn and Limp Bizkit are.
Oh, great.
Yeah. He worked on the Fear Factory album in some kind of production capacity. I'm not sure. But I say that because it's the mid-'80s. Mom's on her second marriage and it's not doing well. She's kind of an alcoholic. I think if I were, 18, 19 years old and my mom was going through all of that, I might be more inclined to listen to some nu metal.
Oh, yeah.
I might really gravitate towards that.
I don't know if I would pick nu metal, but I'd be listening to some Metallica.
Something angry.
Something angry, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So she's since gone on to write a bunch of self-help style books and has given countless courses and has a YouTube channel with a lot of her helpful stuff. But the work is essentially like a worksheet, and there are 4 essential questions. You start with those 4 questions, and really all it does is help the patient direct their inquiry inward. There are lots of different methods for self-inquiry, and there are lots of different schools of thought on how to get people to really look at themselves and do some metacognition. And this is another way to do that, but it's a really simple way. I think pretty much anyone can understand this, and it could lead them to some real self-discovery.
When I think of Byron Katie, I think of half sort of new age and half non-duality. That's just how I think of it. It's like non-duality light, because for everything there's different levels to go into it. Like if you're looking into like just absolute non-dual truth, you're probably looking at like Nisargadatta and Ramana Maharshi and like people like that, where it's just like basically that kind of self-inquiry is, who am I? And we went through that.
Yeah.
She's doing the same thing. It's self-inquiry.
Yep.
It's like she put a different spin on it or something. Not for like hey, here's a different spin on it.
Right.
Just more like this is the work that she did for herself.
Yeah.
And her whole thing was like, well, once I started putting my thoughts down on paper, the only way that I could figure out to bring them into real life was to write them on a piece of paper. Now it's a physical thing. I can look at it.
Yeah.
And I can apply questions to it.
Yeah.
And figure it out, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Because a thought is like such a etheric, weird thing that you can't find, that if you bring it down into this density
Right.
with a pencil or a pen,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. Well, real quick too,
Yeah.
that's another way to detach, because I think a big part of what she's doing is helping you detach yourself from the suffering that you have inflicted upon yourself.
Absolutely.
And so by putting it down on paper, now like you can wad up that paper, you can set it on fire, you can do whatever, but it's out of your head for the first time and onto something physical for the first time.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to get weird and metaphysical, I mean, the actual writing of that thought is bringing it into this dimension or this density or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's a real deal thing.
Yeah.
Like your intention of writing that, if you even look at the ink and the patterns of the graphite of the pencil or whatever, if you like microscoped in on that, it would be almost a recording
Yeah.
of that thought.
Yeah.
Which is totally abnormal spaces. No, anyway, so what I think is interesting also is her, quote, awakening when she was laying on the floor of that halfway house or whatever she was in. She was in some kind of like mental institution. She was just manically depressive, and she was sleeping on the floor. She got, woken up by a cockroach crawling over her foot. This is like the story, like if anybody's like, what's your story,
Yeah.
And then she opened her eyes and just realized that she didn't know anything, including herself.
Yeah.
She didn't have a reference point for anything. There wasn't any attachment or identification with anything.
Yeah.
That never stopped, apparently.
Yeah.
What I think is really interesting is if you watch interviews with her, how difficult it is for her to talk, because she's so present that it's hard to play past and the future.
Yeah.
And that's all of the people who've had some sort of awakening like that. I mean, there's no reference point for any of the words that you're saying, because that's all past knowledge.
Yeah. All of the non-dualists that I am familiar with are that way.
Yeah.
Because there isn't, all there is now, you know. It, we say it a lot here.
Yeah, but it's true.
That's why we say it so much.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, so she has these 4 questions, and we had done that recording earlier on one of the podcasts where we said, who am I? And, it is very similar in some ways to that to me. I think my favorite, though, of the 4 is number 3, which is, when I believe that, how do I feel about that? How does that make me feel?
How does it make me react?
How does it make me react? And then so when you do the turnarounds, it's, if I think of it this other way, how does that make me feel? And like some people might look at that and go, oh, well, you're just finding a clever way to delude yourself. If you lie to yourself about reality, then maybe you'll feel better. And I'm like, okay, if you're having that thought, then that means, 1, that you accept the premise that reality as we experience it is defined by our thoughts. So you're confirming what she's saying. And 2, is it not also the case that you're lying to yourself about how good you are at something. So, for example, people have this imposter syndrome problem where they believe that they're not good enough to do the thing that everyone else seems to think they're good enough to do. And so they begin lying to themselves. I'm not good enough. They should never have promoted me to this position, or, they're going to find out that I'm a failure or whatever. So when I read number 3 and it said, how do you feel, or how does that believing that thought make you feel? That's when I was like, she's on to the same things we've been talking about. Perception is reality. The thoughts that you entertain about yourself shape how you function, period. Like whether you're going to be successful at something, whether you have confidence, all of that is based on the stories about yourself that you're telling yourself. And she just helps people see that.
And also that none of that is reality.
Right. Yeah, because there really isn't a reality other than the reality that you make for yourself.
Right.
So if you're going to make a reality for yourself, why would you make it negative?
Yeah, or like reality is touch your hand or touch the table.
Yeah.
Reality's not, this is my hand, this is the table.
Right.
That's exactly this whole work.
Yeah.
The whole work is, you say I'm holding a coffee mug, and you're like, describe this coffee mug. And I'm like, okay, well, this coffee mug is cold a little bit. It's cool. It's hard. I can hear it and tap it and all that. And so, but actually it has nothing to do with this coffee mug.
Right.
Like this reality set of sensations, or whatever you want to call it, that is actually happening right now.
Right.
That is not passing through time.
Right.
It's just here.
Right. And it's just your perception of the mug.
Right.
So the mug is irrelevant.
Right.
All that matters is your perception of the mug.
Right. Because, you're going to name your sensations: hot, cold, heavy, light.
Yep.
So we have to put this name on everything. And what happens is, for the majority of humankind, is that we get identified with our descriptions of everything.
Yeah.
That is how the world works. And so what's really funny and sad about that is that none of it's a truth. It's all just I don't want to say a lie. It's not a lie either. It's not like how it is. How would you even say that?
Yeah.
It's like a paradox.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yeah, well, because everything is defined by the language that you are using to define it. So, right, it is, yeah.
Yeah, like somebody was interviewing her, and he was like, so what you're saying is all thoughts are lies. And she goes, well, I'm just waiting on the evidence, that's all.
Yeah.
She goes, in my world, she always says in my world, and
Yeah.
I think it's funny because there's not a better way to say this. She's like, well, in my world, I just haven't found one yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And but that is a more true statement because it is in her world.
Right.
And yeah.
But if you do this work, you'll find that it's in your world as well.
Right.
Because it's the world of the mind and the stories.
Yeah.
And it's cloaked in this sort of like, when you first see it, you might be like, oh, it's one of these self-help type people. It's cloaked in that.
Right.
But it's not that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. She kind of backs people into it, who would never entertain the whole non-dualism. They would, it's too heady, or it's not, it doesn't comport with the reality that they believe that they exist in. It's not palatable to the masses, but they come in hurting, they need help. And so, she just kind of gently nudges them in that direction, to kind of liberate them from the suffering that they've attached themselves to.
You can go to byronkatie.com or thework.com. I don't know which one it is, but you can just download this Judge Your Neighbor worksheet.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I've done it before and it's really interesting. You can do it about anything, like your dead dad or your, like I've done it about my dad, it's like, because you need to figure out all the stories that you tell yourself or the memories that you have of a person. Like, he was a good dad at a time when I was young. And then like when I got older, he was shitty and then blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But if you take one of those things at a time and then you apply this formula to it and you really sit with it, you realize that none of that's true.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's kind of a mind fucker. Like,
yeah. Well, the other thing I like too is like, and that's why I like the third thing so much is how do I feel? Because if you're like, my dad was bad for whatever reason, and you're like, is this true? Yeah. I'm going to say objectively it's true or whatever. And they're like, how does that make you feel? Well, I don't like it. Well, of course you don't like it.
yeah.
Like, so my thing is, why keep thinking that same thought if you know you don't like it?
Or how does it make me react? Like,
Yeah.
It makes me bummed. It makes me depressed.
Right.
It makes me sad, angry.
Yeah.
And then you look at that and you're like, so that one little thing does all that to you and you walk around like that.
Yeah. Attached to it, just carrying it. And so I often think of our perception as a series of filters. So, we have the filter of our lived experience and we have the filter of whatever our anxieties are about the day and on and on and on. So we have so many filters. So everything that we observe and think, touch, and feel passes through those filters. The negative ones, you might as well remove those filters. So in that scenario, Dad was bad when I was young and now I have these problems and it's all his fault and whatever else. Okay, but you're still choosing to use that filter all the time. Take that filter off.
Yeah.
That way your perception is slightly less clouded and you don't have all of the trappings. It's almost like a Studio Ghibli character or something. Like you have this bag of attachments of negativity or fear, anxiety, depression, whatever. You're taking it with you and then you scan. Our brains are trained for that. So we start scanning for all the things that are letting us down, making us depressed, etc. And we stuff them in the bag and the bag gets bigger and we keep carrying it. And it's like, I want to unpack that thing and I want to not put any more of this in it. So the best way to do that is first, stop putting new stuff in it.
Yeah.
And second, start pulling out the stuff that is not.
Put the bag down and open it.
Put the bag down and open it.
Right.
Start with that. And let's start taking this stuff out and seeing how we feel about it.
Take it out one at a time.
Yep.
I would also say that you're not choosing these repetitive thoughts. You're just unconscious that is your narrative.
Yeah.
Once you start to pay attention, then you do become conscious of the narrative that is always bubbling.
Yeah.
And it applies itself in every situation of your life.
Yeah.
So when you start seeing that, after a while, you actually, when you talk to other people, you start seeing their narrative.
Yeah.
And it becomes like, you're like, oh, that's me too. I have that narrative too.
Yeah.
And I can see that. And that doesn't mean you're going to go like, oh, your narrative,
Yeah,
you
right.
don't say anything. You're just like, wow, you start to see how everybody's the same,
Yeah.
even if the details are different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and how everyone is somewhat controlled by the story they tell themselves about themselves. And so like you're having a conversation with somebody and you're seeing some of this seep out now because you have done the work and you have done some self-directed self-inquiry because you have trained your brain to scan for that. Now you're scanning for it in other people sometimes. And this is all subconscious, under the radar.
Yeah.
But then you start to pick up on it And one thing that it allows me to do is give a little bit more grace to other people.
Yeah.
So I'm like, man, we're all struggling.
Right.
We've all got these filters and this bag of crap. And, I need to do this person the favor of trying to see through all of their filters and trying to see past their bag of crap.
Yeah.
And, so I think that's a really liberating thing too, because once you start easing up on yourself, you can start easing up on other people. Or sometimes people are the other way, where they have to ease up on other people first and then they can start easing up on themselves. Whichever way it goes, we all just need to kind of ease up a little bit.
The easing up is the thing.
Yeah.
And the consciousness is the thing. Like being aware and conscious is the thing. Everybody's just walking around with this dream hat on. It's like a bag over your head.
Yeah.
And you're just like looking out of this bag at everything and just going, well, I don't know. Well, they're like that and they did this and he did that and I don't like this and I don't like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when you live like that, of course, life can only show you that.
Right.
And since humans are such habitual creatures, if you do the work for 21 days, technically, you will automatically question every thought that comes into this present existence.
Yeah.
And if it's negative, then you have a question to ask.
Yeah.
And most of them are negative.
Yeah.
Most of them are complaints and victim-y sounding stuff. And I haven't done it because here's one for me, because I'm lazy doing that. And most people, it's hard to stick with something for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every day.
Yeah.
But if it was something that you love doing, it's not as hard.
Right.
But when it's looking at yourself through a lens, like a pure lens,
Yeah.
it's like really not pleasant.
You can't use the excuses that you normally use.
Right.
If you're true and you really follow the work, then you can't use those excuses, and it forces you to confront yourself, which is what everyone needs. Everyone needs, I fully believe this. They used to say a serving of humble pie or whatever. And I kind of feel like, yeah, if people directed some of their attention inward and really saw what they were doing to themselves, and then in turn doing to other people, because now that's the way that they perceive the world and work within the world. If people did more of this, then they would realize, I need to ease up. That's just it. I need to ease up.
Yeah. It's powerful stuff. I just think it is not a weird thing, but it's a very helpful thing. And I think that everyone could use a look at themselves. And this is a really good way for just a person who's not trying to like be philosophical and do deep dives and all that. This is just a very surfacey, nice way to do a thing that could be very helpful to your existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
And everyone else's existence around you.
Yeah. Make your life better and those around you.
Right.
It's a soft introduction.
Right.
It's a soft introduction to non-duality. It's a soft introduction to like deep diving self-inquiry. And if you have an acute problem, then you can just focus on that problem and start with that. You go through the worksheet, you spell out everything, and then do it. And you can get some relief from whatever that particular problem is. That's the thing that I like about it, because some of the non-duality stuff is so nebulous and so big. And it really, at the end of it, I think a lot of people don't get relief from it because it's so frustrating.
Of course.
And so it's like, okay, maybe you're not ready for all of that, but you've got this problem, you've got this recurring thought that's really slowing you down or making your days darker. And so you start with that. You start with the acute problem and you analyze it and you analyze yourself. And when I say analyze too, this isn't even that heady. There's really not that much to it. It's basically playing with the words of the story you've been telling yourself so that you can understand it from different perspectives. That's really what it does.
Yeah, it doesn't go much past that. You're right. The non-duality thing is just, when you get into that sort of paradox of watch your thoughts and we'll do this and all, well, it's really hard to watch all your thoughts.
Yeah.
It's really hard to watch one thought.
Yeah.
So that's why this is so good, I think. It's just because you could just pull a family member or whoever in and just be like, okay, What's one thing that's the worst thing right now?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's really cool because, again, that also takes some of the excuses away. It's like, there's one thing that bothers you. I know there is.
Yeah.
There's one person who's frustrated you or let you down. I know there is.
Right.
And that's all it takes. You start with that and you train yourself on that particular problem and that particular person or whatever.
Consistently, over virtually of the past 50 years, and actually the past 30 years. This film that's a situation of this where I'm in a situation of this pressure under tremendous to produce, because I have to produce, because one authority on economy, sane government who can try. Sane government, that's his stand right now.
Lyndon LaRue. United States is moving to a virus.
Well, the United States is moving into a trap. As I mentioned before, the bailout process, which is going on in the world.
So brains try to conserve energy. And one of the things that brains are really good at doing is creating heuristics. All of the extra cognitive work, we can skip it because we've set up these baselines. When I see this, it's always this. Or when I feel this, it's always this. And so we do that subconsciously. One thing that this helps people do without telling them this is what they're doing, it helps to get rid of some of those heuristics, because I think that's what happens when people get into those negative spirals, those loops of this pattern of negative thought, is the brain's like, hey, I know what this is. We'll just do this, and we'll just keep doing this because this is what we know, and this makes sense. And so the brain just, somewhat lazily, I like to think of it as conserving energy, but regardless, it just throws you into this loop. So what happens is you're stuck in that loop now. So this is a way of helping you stop that loop and retrain the brain to start scanning for those thoughts and how they make you feel, so that then you can go, you know what, I don't like this thought. When it resurfaces, I'm going to remind myself that this isn't absolutely true, or I can't know this to be true, so I should quit bothering myself with this.
And how do I feel?
Yeah.
How do I react?
And when I think that it is true, it makes me sad. But when I know that I can't absolutely know that it's true, it makes me feel a whole lot less sad. So, and that's what you do. You just start with that.
Yeah, and then eventually, instead of carrying a big old Grinch Santa Claus bag full of loops, then you'll just have like a wallet.
Yeah.
And think about like walking through life, you're just free.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this in the car the other day. I was driving to get some food. I was in this weird mind state, and I was having a sort of an inquiry deal in the car, and I was talking to myself out loud, so nobody laughed, but people do this shit. You just talk to yourself sometimes.
Oh, yeah, you have to.
I was like, okay, so who am I? Okay, I'm like, who am I? Who am I? Then out of nowhere, I was just like, I think thoughts. I think my thoughts. So that's a thought. How did I do that? And I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm like, where's the blueprint? Where's the formula to create a thought? What's the underlying directions of how to put a thought together?
Yeah.
And there's not one.
Right.
We believe we're these meanderings and these ramblings and all these beliefs and everything. But we can explain to you how it's done. If somebody's like, make me a cup of coffee, I can explain to you how it's done.
Right.
Because I can do it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it because I've done it before and I remember it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how I remember it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It comes up in the present, in the only time that it could come up. That's all that's happening as I'm talking even right now.
Yeah.
As we talk right now and these words are coming, they're just like fluid. I can't pre-think these words or else I'd be like, which I do a lot. But as soon as they appear, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then there's like this faint echo in your memory of you saying them.
Yeah.
And that faint echo is also a thought.
Yeah.
That's how cunning it is.
Yeah.
And so when Byron Katie like kind of goes in there, she's addressing this ego who you think you are, this personality, this ego, these thoughts, and it hides.
Yeah.
It's like a parasite. It like finds a dark spot to go hide into, and then it like starts to fight back.
Yeah.
And it's true that when you'll get defensive,
Yep.
you'll make up all kinds of excuses. It's like you're possessed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like you are the lie.
for real.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are the lie.
You are the lie.
Yeah.
I find it really fascinating thinking about like the recipe or the blueprint for a thought. Like I couldn't tell someone else how to form a thought because I can't even tell myself how to form a thought.
Right.
The thoughts just happen.
Right.
And the best I can do is observe the thought, identify the feeling attached to that thought, and perhaps then controlling the thought, like once it bubbles up, like pushing it back down or saying, yeah, every time I think that, I feel bad, so I'm going to stop thinking that now. I mean, that's the kind of the best we can hope for since we have no idea where these thoughts even originate from.
In my opinion, whatever that means, they don't originate from anywhere.
Yeah.
That's why they're so elusive, because they're not even originating from a place. There's not like a depository of thoughts.
Right. Well, and they're not original. All the thoughts that
Right.
we have been thought before.
Yeah, not even one original thought.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Now we've gone heavy with it. But it's good because, like you said, this seems like an emergency inquiry.
Yeah.
Because these people are very upset. Some people are suicidal. Some people are just cannot hold it together,
Yeah.
And they get up in front of 1,000 people
Right.
and just sit on stage with her. And then she's like, okay, read your paper.
Yeah.
And then they do. And then like towards the end of it, most people are just cracking up.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't get over it. Like, I mean, there are people who have been through some terrible things
Yeah.
and they're crying as they're reading through it. And she's so calm and patient, but also firm.
She's very emotional as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's not like she doesn't feel for these people. It's like very,
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
She's not cold and clinical at all.
right.
But you're right. The things that are less terrible, but still bad, by the time everything's said and done, they start to answer it before they're like, oh, that's me. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh. And they start to kind of chuckle at themselves because they're like, it is this simple. It really is this simple.
Yeah, it's the simplest thing that you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And it makes you mad that it's that simple.
Right.
How do you react? Well, I get mad when I think it's that simple.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to overcomplicate things. Most human beings believe there's a lot more complexity involved than there is on many things. And so because of that, we refuse to believe the simple answer. We refuse to believe it's as simple as, I don't like the way that makes me feel. I'm going to stop thinking that thought, or when I think that thought, I'm going to dismiss it immediately.
I'm going to look at it.
I'm going to look at it and go, you know what?
Shine a light on it.
Yeah. You know what? Here that thought is again, and here's the way it's making me feel. I'll tell you this. I am not versed in this, but I have done lots of self-inquiry over my life. And in the last few years, I have gotten really good at stopping these negative spirals by doing simply that. Like, why am I thinking about this?
Mm-hmm.
This is not helpful at all.
Right.
And it really is that simple.
Right. And also just putting a spin on it, like, why am I even thinking about this? Why? That has a connotation of, why are you thinking about this, dummy?
Yeah, yeah.
And then when you come at it from just a slightly different angle of this work, it's real neutral.
Yeah.
It's not, it's less damning to your ego or to your whatever. She even says it. She's like, I'm in love with the ego.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful little child to me who's running around, breaking dishes and climbing trees. And,
living life. Yeah.
Right. And there's nothing unnatural about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. She has a book called Loving What Is.
Mm-hmm.
And not really those exact words, but that's kind of been my mantra for a long time. It's like, well, this is what it is. So let's not try to call it something else. There are certain things we can fight, I guess, for lack of a better term. But there are some things it's just like, well, it is what it is. That's the phrase that everyone says. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, exactly. When we become aware, when we start with one thing, one thought, and we become aware enough that we're having that thought, first of all, that's huge.
Yeah.
Second of all, is questioning it and figuring out if it's true and seeing how it makes you feel when you believe it, and then turning it around to see if that's true.
Right.
Once you become aware, it's almost like you flip the aware switch into this dimension of awareness where before you were unaware.
Yeah.
I imagine it as like a brand new cassette tape and you do 100 dubs on it. You listen to that song, it's going to sound like shit.
Yeah.
Then you put a brand new tape in and then you do one song on it. And it's like,
Yeah.
It's exactly like that with the mic because the energy doesn't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It keeps collecting and then you get more stress and then more stress equals physical problems, and then the physical problems start happening, and that's all in your body, and then your body stores all these traumas and emotions as fat.
Yeah.
And it doesn't know what to do with it. So it's like, well, let's put it in the fat because we got too much of it. We have to protect the organs and we got to protect all the vital stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So we're going to do this. And, that's why you use emotional eating, like comfort food. All that stuff it's stress.
Yep.
It's an unconscious reaction to tons and tons of stress in every waking moment.
Right. Most people, they keep adding to that stress and they think they have some ways of relieving it. Oh, I'm going to have a drink. Oh, I'm going to, go for a run or whatever. And they're like, oh, good. I feel less stressed now. And they do for that moment. But the thing is it's still there. And so what happens is over time, and this is why older people seem to be, and I don't mean like really old because there's a point where it doesn't matter so much anymore, but like middle age, there's a lot of grumpiness in middle age. And I think a big part of that is you've got all these little things that annoy you and have bothered you and you've never dealt with them and you thought you dealt with them because you went for the run or you did the thing or whatever and you took the little vacation, whatever. And then what happens is now, since your level is already almost full, each little tiny thing that should just be a stupid annoyance that you forget a second later, instead, now that's piled on top. And what used to happen to me all the time is that would supercharge all of the other ones in there. And so like a little thing would happen and then I'd be thinking about some terrible thing that happened or something that still bothers me from 15 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever. And so now I'm dealing with all of those other things plus this little annoyance. And what ended up working for me was all of this self-inquiry and all of this, why am I thinking this thought? Or sometimes I don't even care why I'm thinking about it. Sometimes it's more, how is this making me feel? Do I like feeling this way? If not, then I'm going to stop feeling this way. Or do I like feeling this way? Oh, I do? Okay, well, I'm going to scan for this. Or I think I don't like it, but I must like it because it keeps coming up. So what am I getting out of feeling bad?
Exactly.
And that is crazy when you realize that you're actually getting something out of making yourself feel bad.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's creepy and weird.
It is. The way that we can be such masochists when it comes to how we treat ourselves, it floors me. So I've been on this quest now for a number of years, and this just fits in beautifully. If I had never had these thoughts, one, I'd probably try to dismiss this like, well, self-help, who cares? But if I actually did it, it would get me to where I am now, or where I'm trying to be now. And I think anyone who has these kinds of problems, they should definitely try it. It's easy.
Absolutely. It might be one of the easiest things and maybe one of the hardest things that you do because you really have to turn off your judgment and fear mechanisms enough to at least write something down on paper and admit that you are having some issues.
Yeah.
And for people who are in like a state that's manic or like just like, oh my God, this thing, I'm going through this thing, whatever it is, it may not be as hard because you just want relief from it.
Yeah. A lot of times people feel like, oh, this is the way I've felt for the last 10 years. I can't imagine, not feeling this way or whatever. Well, first of all, that's a limiting thought. I can't imagine. Let's try to imagine not feeling that way. But
it's comfortable.
It is so comfortable. It's so familiar.
It's just comfort.
And it requires no effort.
Right.
Because it's already being done. So,
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're absolutely right. But now I got to remember what it was I was going to say.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's the way my brain works. So one of the things that I think is really interesting is people will think that, it's always been this way or it's been this way the last 10 years, and I don't know that I'm ever going to come out of this or whatever. The brain rewires itself fairly easily. And what I mean by that is it doesn't take a whole bunch of difficult psychotherapy. It doesn't necessarily take a bunch of pharmaceuticals. What it takes is new repetitive thoughts, or what I like to think of as like interceptive thoughts. So you start to have this repetitive pattern and you intercept it with an intercepting thought. There have been lots of brain studies done that show that if a person had something that activated the pleasure center, and then something changes, so now there's like a negative association with it, the brain actually reroutes that stimuli to the amygdala. So the amygdala is what's largely responsible for fear and anxiety. And the reason it does that, the theory is that it just has to do with our threat detection, threat awareness systems that are built in and how we deal with those things. And so the brain is trying to help you. It's like, hey, last time that this happened, it wasn't pleasurable like it was, before. Now it's a bad thing. So now every time that this particular stimuli comes in, it's going straight to the fear center and straight to the anxiety center. What the further research has shown, though, is that you can actually reroute it back away from the amygdala as long as you work at it and as long as you can find a way to kind of block it from going to the amygdala and back to, I guess, probably the prefrontal cortex or wherever the pleasure center is. I forget my brain anatomy sometimes. But anyway, it's probably hippocampus. Well, doesn't matter. Anyway, so people think that. They're like, I'm never going to come out of this. And I just want to say it's way easier than you think because your brain's ready to do it. Your brain can't wait to have a new connection and then not think about it anymore, because that's what the brain loves to do. It's like, okay, this isn't a problem? Okay, cool. In the not problem category. Next.